2 years ago, I signed up on the cat sitting app Meowtel as a sitter. At the time, I really had no idea what to expect, really curious if it was a good way to make some extra money. Well, today, I'm going to give you a 2-year update on what my experience has been like. I have learned so much, I've experienced so much, and I have definitely gotten a lot more knowledge to share with anybody who might be interested in cat sitting through Meowtel, or really honestly cat sitting in general, as either a part-time side hustle or even a full-time career. Before we begin, just a little bit of background. My name is Shannon. I am the Meow Me to the beautiful Miss Katniss Siamese. She's on Instagram if you want to follow along. As well, I am a small business owner and I do pet sitting and specifically cat sitting part-time as a side hustle currently. And that's probably the thing that's really important to stress here is this, for me, is a very part-time thing. One of the biggest questions I had starting out is this just gonna be part-time or am I gonna take this full-time? For now, still 2 years later, it is very much still a part-time thing, although the amount of work I've been doing has really grown, and I can't wait to share these insights with you. The first thing to stress is that the demand is real. So I really, going into this, had absolutely no idea if I was going to get legit work through the site, and if I did get legit work, was it going to be a lot of work, a little bit of work? And I'm just here to tell you that it has been really surprising in a positive way how many jobs I've gotten through this app. Now granted, in the beginning, when I was just starting out, it was a little bit of slower, but as I began to get experience and get, importantly, reviews on my page, then the requests just kept coming in. And now I've been on it long enough to know that literally the work is there. I do put the caveat in there that I'm speaking specifically from my area, which is in Colorado. And I do think this may vary depending on where you're located. So obviously if you are in a big city or area, especially a pet-loving big city or area, there's probably going to be more work than, a smaller town or where pets aren't maybe, I don't even know if there are cities where pets aren't valued as much, but I do know that Colorado is known for being a very pet-friendly, pet-accommodating, pet-loving place. Second point about just what you can earn. So in my video that I made initially, I was guessing based on just my initial impressions that it would be fairly easy to make between $500 and $1,000 extra dollars per month. Well, 2 years later, I'm here to tell you that that is absolutely accurate. Last year, 2023, the entire calendar year, I averaged nearly $700 a month. And this year, 2024, so far, I am closer to $900 a month average. Again, this being very part-time. Currently, how things stand for me now, I could easily double that amount. I've actually turned down quite a bit of work just due to my schedule. So without even thinking about it, if I had the bandwidth available, that amount could double pretty quickly. And that's without me doing anything extra. I think that I could probably triple or possibly even quadruple it if I was to go more the full-time route. The thing about money that you earn on Meowtel is they do take a fee from your earnings. And they operate on a sliding scale, which essentially means that for any client, and it's calculated individually per client over a lifetime. So they take 30% from new clients. Whatever you earn, 30% is theirs. But with a client, once you get to $300 earnings, that amount drops down to only 25% for the next, I believe it's $300 to $1,000 you earn. And then it gradually declines the more you earn with that client. So I have definitely gotten some clients actually to the highest, or really it would be the lowest range in terms of what Meowtel takes, the highest range in terms of what I have earned. But the majority of my clients are operating in about level 2 or 3. So it's pretty easy to get past that first level. Not quite as much the other two, but just know that Meowtel takes fees and the numbers I gave you are after Meowtel has taken its commission. But before, importantly, that I've paid taxes on it. So the next thing I've learned is what type of visits are most in demand. So Meowtel, you can offer a 20-minute visit to a client's home, a 45-minute visit to a client's home, a 60-minute visit to a client's home, or an overnight stay in a client's home. And you can also offer your services for once a day or twice a day. And you can set these things individually, so whatever works for you, you can turn it on or off. I have generally speaking, kept my options open with the exception of overnights when Katniss, my cat, was sick and going through some issues. I turned off my overnights completely just because I wanted to be home with her. But I can tell you that just from nearly 2 years of experience, by far, the 20-minute and the 45-minute visits are the most in demand. In fact, I have never had a client request a 60-minute visit in all of my time working for Meowtel. And I have had a few people inquire about overnights, but almost never. And so by far, 20, 45-minute is where I would focus my attention. It really varies depending on a client wanting you to come once a day or twice a day. That's kind of half and half. I have clients that are just fine with a 20-minute visit any time of day that works for me. And then I have clients that have requested 2 20-minute visits, like one in the morning, one in the evening, or a 45-minute visit. That's typically what happens, but there's no absolutes. So another feature about Meowtel is that you can offer a holiday, well, I guess offer would not be the right word. You can add a holiday surcharge in and around federal holidays. So they have a list of federal holidays that this applies to, and you will see that the date ranges for these holidays extends before the holiday actually is there and after. And during this time, the default setting, I believe, is 30% that you can add to your fees. You are, as a sitter, able to change that. I have left mine at 30%, which the net effect of that really is that that's eating up Meowtel's commission, so you're really getting your full rate during holiday times. And that works out really nicely because, I mean, not a huge shock, but during holidays, people are typically looking for pet sitters, so you get a lot of work. So the next thing I've learned is that Meowtel as a platform, they really care. That's the impression that I have. And I say this for many reasons, but really it's just the amount of things that they offer to their sitters. So number one, the platform is really, I mean, it is not simple. They maintain it, they do all the upgrades, they constantly listen to feedback and make changes. It tracks just tons of stuff for you. It's essentially the equivalent as if you were buying your own software to run your own business. And it is super helpful there. But they also offer like educational webinars every once in a while that sitters can sign up for. And they go over not only important changes on the platform, but just sitter things, and they answer questions. They send out a regular newsletter that is both educational and just kind of also motivational for sitters, like highlighting the sitter of the month and the pet and just tips and articles that are really good. And they have a really good support system if you were to reach out and call or text them with questions or issues. I've had to do that a few times, we'll get into that later, and they've always been extremely responsive. And so as a sitter, I feel good knowing that it's both professionally run and thorough, but also it makes a really good presentation and just a good impression about how the business is run and just the amount of effort they're putting into it. So the next thing I've learned is actually something I've heard through multiple people who have messaged me directly on Katniss's Instagram and or YouTube, but it's essentially that not everybody who applies is going to be accepted. I've heard from multiple people that their area, that Meowtel essentially told them that their area did not have a need or demand for more sitters at that time, but they could reapply maybe in 6 months down the road. I'll be honest, that really caught me off guard just because I did not have that experience or issue in my area. But I've heard it enough where I believe that it happens, and it makes sense too, because you don't want to oversaturate something and then your sitters don't get any work. That's disappointing, I'm sure, if you're in the position where you want to work for Meowtel and it's not able. But 2 things. 1, reapply. Take that seriously. Reapply. As the platform grows, demand changes. And 2, there are other platforms you can use. I know Rover, the name makes you think dogs, but you can cat sit through Rover. You can use the app next door in your local area to search for people who might be needing a sitter. And I would definitely not let it stop me from cat sitting, but I understand that the news can be very disappointing. Something else I have learned, and this has actually changed since I started working for Meowtel, is they do not track your mileage for jobs. And tracking your mileage for jobs is important because that mileage then becomes a tax write-off against the earnings that you make through Meowtel, and that is important to know how many miles you've driven for Meowtel related purposes. I can't remember why they told me they no longer do it, but they don't, is the bottom line. So you need to have a pretty careful way to track the miles to and from each job, to and from each meet and greet, to and from any errands that you might be running in relation to your work through Meowtel, like to pick something up at PetSmart that you might bring to a job. One time I volunteered more accurately to go pick up some canned pumpkin for a client whose cat was eating it mixed into his food and they had run out, and in the middle of my sitting job we were out of it, so I told them I could run to the store and pick some up. So little things like that, anything related to your job, track. The next thing I've learned, which this surprised me when I first saw it, and the fact that it's continued really surprises me because this would never be me, but the number of clients that are willing to forego a meet and greet with you when they hire you for a job. And in case you don't know, a meet and greet is literally when you go meet the client in person at his or her home, meet the cat, learn the layout of the house, talk about what the job entails, have them show you where food is kept, what to watch out for, etc. It is required through the app, and this is a really good thing. You don't get compensated for meet and greets, but honestly, it's time well spent. It just was going to make you feel so much more comfortable and competent when you go over for the job. If there are any weird vibes about seeing the animal for the first time because you're a stranger, you kind of get that out of the way with the owner there, so it's less threatening. It's just so important to do a meet and greet. But I have to tell you, I'd honestly say it's been about 20% of the time people are like, oh, I could just leave my key for you under the porch, or here's the code to my house. And I am the one bringing up to them, I really would like to schedule a meet and greet. And in fact, I have a policy that if a client will not meet with me ahead of time, I won't take the job. And so far that hasn't been an issue. Everybody has come around and met with me, but it's just surprising to me that I have to initiate that, because as a pet owner, I would not be comfortable just leaving a key for somebody I had never met. I don't care what app they're on or how they were screened. That to me seems like the probability of something going wrong is so much higher. And so this is a step that just be aware that some clients are like that and be prepared to suggest and kind of force the issue. So another thing I have definitely learned is that pretty much, this is probably going to surprise exactly nobody, but pretty much every home has cameras. If they don't have them, you got to assume that they do, because you just don't know. Sometimes they're very visible, sometimes you can't see them. I always assume they're there. And I talked about this in my initial video actually, but if you think that they have a camera, be very, very careful and cognizant of the fact that every and anything you do there is recorded. I think a lot of people hear camera and they're like, I don't have anything to worry about. It's not like I'm gonna go rifle through their stuff or take anything or do anything awful. But take it a step further than that and remember that what you're wearing, any slogans, any support for political issues or people, anything that you might say to somebody who calls your cell if you happen to pick it up in the middle of a job, any and all of these things can also be recorded and can also contribute to creating an impression. And so a really good policy is just to assume there are cameras and make sure that any and everything you do, say, wear, whatever, is tracked. And this goes for how much time you spend at the house too. This has never been an issue for me, which we'll talk about that in a minute, but I have seen in some chat rooms some sitters talking about situations that occurred where they ended up leaving jobs early, typically because the cat might have been hiding and wasn't interacting with them and they weren't sure what to do, and this created a huge issue for them and the client was upset. So, how do you think they knew that? Probably because they had cameras or some way of tracking that person's coming or going. So just assume you're being filmed. Okay guys, the next thing, and this is a big one, and this is something I wish I had known going into this, but Meowtel provides insurance for its sitters, and it applies on jobs when you book them with certain criteria, and I believe that means the rate has to be at least their Meowtel guaranteed promise rate, and you follow Meowtel policies. As long as these things are true, their insurance does cover you in a lot of cases of accident or illness. I have never had to use it. I can't speak to how that works. I just know that it exists. If, on a side note, you own your own pet sitting business, you want insurance for that business. So this essentially kind of takes the place of that. It's one piece of value that the app adds in addition to all the other things I explained. Well, remember what I just said, if a job adheres to Meowtel policies. Because, and here's the second part of that, and really the next thing that I learned, but also just kind of connected, is what violates Meowtel policy, and what happens a lot, is when a client invites somebody else to enter his or her home while they're out of town and you have that job. So let's say I'm watching a cat for a week, and during that week the client has a cleaning service scheduled. This is a really common one. I've encountered it a ton of times, and those cleaning people come in and they clean on Wednesday. Well, guess what? That voids Meowtel's insurance because somebody else has been in that house during that job, and that really, really threw me off guard when I learned that. Because number one, clients typically will not tell you that somebody else is going to be there in my experience. I've actually learned this the hard way, both by coming into the house and seeing things that are way different and thinking for a minute, oh my God, what happened? Did somebody break in? Or being at the house and having somebody walk in, which is also terrifying if you don't expect it. And so I I don't even know what to say except be aware that clients do this, and be aware that if they do this, the Meowtel insurance policy is no longer effective. When I learned this, and I learned it the hard way because I was sitting for these cats that I'd been over to their house multiple times, and I came over and I learned a cleaning service had been there, and the owner had actually told me offhandedly after the fact, oh yeah, by the way, the cleaners were there today, and my cats hate the cleaners, so they might be like in a bad mood. And I was like, okay, well I got there, and guess what? One of their cats couldn't be found. And I literally, like front to bottom of the house, hours texting the owner, freaking out. I actually called Meowtel to report the fact that I was concerned that a cat may have gotten out while the cleaning crew was there, and that is how I learned about the insurance, because they told me, oh, guess what? So that was a nasty shock, because that situation was 100% out of my control, and it made me feel really vulnerable. From their perspective, I do get it, because somebody else coming into the house, now you suddenly have no way to really prove if something goes wrong, who did it, and so why should they cover that? But it also felt a little bit like, what am I supposed to do about that? And in fact, I asked Meowtel, and they said, you might want to discuss this with the client ahead of time, and if you're not comfortable with that, then maybe don't accept the job. I just want you guys to be aware that this is a thing, and if I had some advice about this, one of the questions you need to ask any of your clients is, should I be expecting anybody else in the house, while you are out of town? And that is a perfect lead into the discussion. As a side note, the story I told you, the cat actually had been in the house. I am not sure to this day where she had been hiding, but she did eventually emerge, and all was well that ends well, and I was super, super relieved. But yeah, that was a nasty shock, and it's just really important that you know. Okay guys, this next one, and by the way, I just want to say, I understand a lot of these things that I'm stating could apply to cat sitting in general, not necessarily through Meowtel. Some of them are just good basic practices, such as this one, which is that you need a backup plan for every single job. And boy, have I learned this the hard way. You could be like literally the most responsible person in the world and life happens. And this has occurred to me more than once, actually. So when I first started on Meowtel a while back, my car was totaled literally the night before a series of holiday jobs. That did not turn out to be a huge deal because my parents fortunately had an extra I could borrow. But this year, in like the beginning of the year, Colorado was hit with a horrible snowstorm, like a blizzard. I got 24 inches of snow at my house in a day, and it was physically not possible to get my car out. My clearance on the car is way lower than that. Our neighborhood HOA all neighborhoods were way backed up on the plowing. The roads were awful. Pretty much everything was closed. And of course, I had a 2-time-a-day cat sitting job that was 4 miles each way from my house. And I mean, you can be the most responsible person. I'm sorry, your car's not gonna make it through that snowstorm regardless. And it was like low-key panic time. Fortunately, on this job, I already knew ahead of time that their next door neighbor, who actually was helping, which I guess would void the insurance policy now that I think about it, but she was feeding the cats every day at noon. I was doing morning and evening. And so I knew she was available as an option if for some reason something came up, and I did arrange for her to cover those. I called Meowtel to explain it, and they kindly removed the charges for those particular visits from the customer's account. And they were really cool about it. This was way beyond my control. I even honestly thought about, could I walk there? But honestly, that's 8 miles, and as athletic as I am, I was calculating that's probably 2 hours each way, twice a day. It just was not going to happen. I learned from that, however, to no matter what, it's always a good idea to ask your client, if something happens and I'm unable to get there, do you have a neighbor who could step in? Would it be okay if a family member of mine stepped in the case of an emergency? Somebody maybe they could meet ahead of time. What is the backup plan? I think I probably would have worried back when I started that would make me seem irresponsible, like I'm planning to duck out, when in reality the exact opposite is true. It makes you seem extremely responsible, diligent, and frankly it's just smart, because you just don't know what may happen. Okay, another thing to keep in mind is just how long. So it's a big part of the job. So you are supposed to send a text summary as well as photo and video clips to each client after you wrap up a Meowtel job. And this is just something that I thrive on doing. I think this a lot has to do with my media background, has to do with the fact that I run an Instagram for Katniss, I'm involved with some Instagram for some other things, and I love doing it. And so I take great pride in taking really cool photos and video clips and just writing a summary that informs the clients how the cats are doing, how our visit went, anything that stood out. But one thing that I didn't really think about when I was accepting jobs is just how long this actually takes to do properly. And this is just my philosophy. I don't think it's fair to do this during the 20 or 45 minutes the client has scheduled. It is not, they're not paying me to sit on their couch and just do this whole summary as part of that. I spend that time interacting with the cats, taking the pictures, and yeah, sometimes while the cats are eating, or I might go through the pictures. And I will type up a very brief summary saying just wrapping up my visit, here's the summary, and then I'll add a line, pictures and videos coming as soon as I get home. Because when I get home, I have to go through those pictures and videos. And video clips have to be 15 seconds or less to go through on the Meowtel app. And this is not insignificant time. I probably spend 20 to 30 minutes per job doing this, in addition to the time at the job. Granted, I may be going a little overboard. I do tend to photo/video bomb my clients, which is something, by the way, almost all of them mention when they do reviews on me. They love it. But it is not something that you should discount in terms of it just taking more of your time. So be aware that to do it properly takes time. You need to do it though. You need to do it no matter what. Okay, here's a fun one. When you cat sit enough, you're going to be exposed to a lot of different products and things people are buying for their cats that may in fact give you ideas for your own fur baby. A recent one is a really cool brush. I mean, Katniss, I've not really brushed her a ton, but I found this glove brush that one of these cats I watch loves. Oh my gosh, she's so obsessed with it. And I thought it'd be a good solution for Katniss, so I bought one, brought it home, and guess what? She tolerates it so much better than a typical brushing. And honestly, I never would have even known this product existed had it not been for a cat sitting job. So this kind of accidental exposure to toys and things that work for other cats may in fact give you the inspiration to shop for your own. Just one more thing about the clear communication with the clients and the summaries is be clear. Instead of saying the cats or the cat, use the cat's name, personalize it. And understand that anything you write could be used as a legal record should something happen. Therefore, my policy, if I have a question about anything, I put it in writing. And if it's something like, should this be plugged in or is this okay like that, I will take a picture of it and include that with my photo. And this has really helped dealing with the anxiety that sometimes will hit me when it's stuff I would never do at my house, like leave that cord out because Katniss would chew it. But if I've sent it to the parents and they okay it, that is now beyond my control. So I'm just saying clear, cat name, and document, document, document. One video I will always take on a job, and this is something I've done from the beginning, and it was kind of instinctual that I started doing this, and I'm so glad I do, is I will take a video when I am leaving of the cat or cats in the house, so it's very clear they're there, myself walking to the door, showing as I open the door and leave that no cat has escaped, shutting the door, locking, and testing the door. And I am just doing this as a CYA, because if something were to happen, if somebody shows up there unexpectedly, I can prove that it had nothing to do with the last time that I was in that house. Because a cat running out is a huge concern. Oh my god. And a side note, I actually have a story about this. Not proud of this one, but there was a lesson. And so that's the tip. This is a story unrelated, I'm still going to tell you. A great client. I love these people. They have 2 cats. They're really laid back and fun. In fact, they literally were kind of joking, but when I first went to my meet and greet with them, they're like, your only responsibility is just make sure they have a good time and don't die. And they were laughing and telling me I could help myself to stuff in the pantry and just very laid back cool. So, this was a longer job and I had been doing it about a week, and I'm always careful when I get to a house and open the door. And there had been no issues, neither cat had tried anything until one day, about a week into my job, I opened the door and what was different is one of the cats was right there. I was like, that's kind of weird because typically they're far back and they hear the noise and they come running, but the cat had never been right there. And it really threw me off, so I kind of cracked open the door and I'm focusing on making sure this cat doesn't get out. Where meanwhile, the second cat, who I think was hiding behind the door, and I think they kind of ambushed me, ran around and right out the front door. So I literally think they had this planned. No joke. I think these cats set me up. And I was stunned, what? And I tried my best to grab it real fast and couldn't do it. And Instinctively, my reaction was to immediately shut the door so the other cat is in the house and follow this cat around the side of the house. And long story short, I see she goes into the backyard and under the deck. There's no way I can get under the deck. I'm coaxing her, calling her, panicking, like, what do I do? What do I do? Pretty quickly, I went back into the house and I'm thinking, I gotta get a hold of the pet parents. I gotta tell them what happened and ask if they have some tips for me or what. I knew it wasn't good, but I also know that the worst thing you can do when a mistake happens is try to cover it up. And so I am looking through our notes, looking for the best way to reach them. And as I'm searching for this, because they were international trip at this time, at the back door, guess who shows up? Literally, backsliding glass door, there's the cat that had fooled me, just smiling, waiting to be left in. I was like, oh, thanks, that's nice. So I let the cat in and, huge relief. I also still told the pet parents in a text what had happened. I said I was just getting ready to call you. Here's the situation. It's been resolved. We're good. But I just wanted to let you know. And I'll be honest, I'm so relieved that they were cool about it. She just kind of laughed and she's like, oh, they're so used to playing outside. I'm sure they're just getting antsy. She so easily could have made a big deal out of that, made me feel terrible. I did feel terrible. But the fact that they were cool, I'm grateful. I'm also extremely grateful the cat came back. I do not take that for granted. But I think the lesson from this is that just because something has been true for the first part of your job, it does not mean the cat's behavior cannot change. And in fact, I think it's a fair assumption that an animal might act a little bit differently than you're used to the longer their parents are gone, when they're in a new environment. And granted, their house isn't new, but you being there kind of is. And so be prepared for anything and extra cautious at the door. Okay, this next thing goes in line with the time of the jobs. I think I mentioned that it's not an issue for me leaving earlier in the video. Well, that is because I have fallen into what became a bad habit, which is, I have a policy to stay slightly longer than the booked job. So a client books 20 minutes, I'm probably staying 25 minimum before I leave. Partially that's a buffer zone for if their clock is a little bit not synced with mine. And partially it's because that extra time I kind of feel counters the time. I take it as 20 minutes with the cat, attention to the cat, doing the stuff that the cat needs. Not 20 minutes also including me on my phone typing stuff. So that buffer zone gives me that chance to type that small summary. But what kind of started happening is 5 minutes turned into 10, turned into 15, turned into 20. And there's a few jobs I just stayed way too long for what was booked and paid for. And I'm not saying it made the clients mad, but that really kind of devalues your service if you go too overboard. So while for sure stay the entire time, and I think it's smart to add a little buffer zone, be cognizant that this kind of can creep into a bad habit and definitely set a boundary there. Because if you are having them book and pay for 20 minutes, but you're staying 40, what would ever be somebody's motivation to book more than that? You're really kind of just hurting yourself. Okay, next is you definitely need a system for storing and tracking keys and garage codes. And I'd say about half of my clients have keys and half of them have a garage code for me to get into the house, or maybe a lockbox outside of their house that stores the key. So I don't always have a key, but when I do, it's amazing how many look alike. So I always bring the keys home. I'll add a little piece of masking tape. I will write the cat's name and the job's name, and I keep them all in the same drawer. And no matter how tired I am, and no matter how much I think, oh, I'm not gonna misplace this, I force myself upon walking in the door to immediately put that in that drawer. I don't allow an exception, I'll just rest it on the counter and move it later, because that's, I think, where trouble happens. I write garage codes in my personal notes, and when a client rebooks, I will just say I have the code on hand as blank. Is that still true? Have there been any changes? One thing that I would add to this, I have never had an issue losing a client's key. However, if you do lose a client's key, that's going to be on you to get a locksmith, work with the client to figure out what they want you to do. But I guess the tip would be, and this is based on personal experiences that I've had with my personal home this year, it is not easy to find a good locksmith last minute, and it kind of puts you in low-key panic mode. So maybe screen locksmiths ahead of time and have a plan for what you would do should that happen. Fingers crossed it never does, but you don't want to find yourself in the position of it happening and then you having to screen that, because a lot of those companies, there's so many issues with them, but the biggest thing I ran into is you call a number and it just directs you to a call center, and I don't know where they're based, but they have heavy accents and they're hard to communicate with, and then they're communicating to the company, so they're like a middleman, And it's really hard to know who you're reaching, to get questions answered. And because of that, I had some pretty poor experiences with locksmiths. And now that I've been through it personally, I know who I would call, but I'll tell you what, that did not come quickly or easily, so do your homework ahead of time. Okay, this one is for my cat sitters who are also cat owners like myself. Keep your house cat or cats in mind when you're doing this. Katniss, I mean, every cat's different. Katniss is an only cat and she is sensitive to smells. And it took me a little bit of time in the beginning to realize that me coming home with my clothes smelling like the homes I had been in was actually affecting her negatively. And so now I'm much more cognizant of coming home, leaving my shoes at the door, taking a shower, changing clothes, whatever I need to do, washing my hands thoroughly before touching Katniss. It's helped her feel much better. It's helped our relationship, and I think it's just a good practice. Okay guys, I saved this one for the end because it is probably most relevant to what I'm going through now, and this is something that took some time to realize, but very important. And that is that burnout can sneak up on you. And kind of the problem with this is that by the time you realize you are burnt out, it's kind of too late to do anything about it right then because you have jobs booked way into the future. And so, a couple of things. One, know this is true. I mean, it totally makes sense that people who need pet sitters are planning in advance. But the problem is when somebody, it's now July, or it's really almost July, but when somebody now calls me about a job in October, that may sound amazing. So I take it and I book it and it's booked and we're good to go. But what I can't predict is what's gonna happen in the next few months and how am I gonna feel then and what other extenuating circumstances might hit. And when you do that many times and then suddenly you realize I'm feeling overwhelmed, but you have 2 months worth of really busy to get through, it can wear on you. It can make what is super enjoyable feel like a burden. And so my advice here is to one, just be aware of this, but two, you need to, and this is something I struggle with because I was not a great planner, you need to get good at booking time off in advance. If there is a possibility that, like for the holiday, you might not be there, book the days off till you know. If you know that after 2 months of going, you're just gonna feel exhausted, book a weekend, just a random weekend where you're not going to accept anything. Balance is a little bit tough here because while it is a super enjoyable job, there's a lot of planning that goes into having to be available during the day to get to and from houses during the mornings, the evenings, whatever you're trying to work around. And it can just, at some point, it can just get to you. So I used to be a very go by the seat of my pants and make last minute plans and never book anything in advance, and like the airline tickets booked 2 days before I leave for the trip, and it's just how I operated, how I was used to operating. And this job is not compatible with that. So you have to get really diligent at planning, at proactively just advocating for your time off or your day off or whatever you're gonna need, and accepting that in doing so, you're not gonna be able to take every single job, serve every single person, and that is okay. You guys, I feel like I could probably sit here all day talking Meowtel, cat sitting, and many other things with you surrounding these topics. But at some point, I probably gotta end this video because it's getting super long. If there are any questions you have about anything I've stated or not stated, please drop them below and I will definitely answer them in the comments. There are so many aspects to this, and there's a lot of learn as you go, but I will tell you one thing that hasn't changed in the 2 years since I started doing it, which is my enthusiasm and joy. I'm a cat person. I mean, I'm an animal person really, but I'm in particular a cat person. And I just think it is so incredibly cool that I can get paid to watch other people's cats. I mean, honestly, this is like my side hustle version of a dream job. And as I mentioned in my initial video, I do think sometimes about taking it fuller time. I think I have a better understanding of what that would entail and how that would work now. In fact, I recently just made a video talking about if I think it's a good full-time job. And in that video, I kind of mentioned a few ways I think it could really work. You want to check that out, go ahead. But bottom line is, just know that it is awesome. If you have interest in cat sitting, whether it's a part-time supplementary thing or you're retired and you're looking for something to do, or maybe you do want to build your own big business away from the apps and just kind of get your feet wet in the industry for starters, this is not to be like a corny cat pun girl, but this is a perfect way to go.